Two riveting investigations from the case files of Lieutenant Joe Kenda.
What is going on with your face? What happened?
First, a grainy videotape becomes the only lead in a deadly shootout.
We know there was a conflict between two groups.
You better watch your mouth.
And we know there's two separate gunshots.
Video doesn't lie. Cameras see everything. They're the key.
Then, a shocking attack.
Mr. Howard?
On a 97-year-old man.
Oh my God!
We're all vulnerable, but especially when you're old and can't take care of yourself.
What sinister motive is behind this vicious assault?
Why didn't somebody tell me?
Who else is involved in covering up the facts here?
Dad.
If your anger and your emotions are out of control, they have a tendency to come back and haunt you. Always. Emotion trumps everything, including human luck.
It's Saturday night in Colorado Springs. And store clerk Claretta Chandler is minutes away from wrapping up her shift.
She's ringing up a purchase for a woman inside the store.
Hey, listen, I was thinking about buying a lottery ticket.
And as she's ringing, they hear this pop.
This caused both of them to give each one kind of a quizzical look, like, what did we just hear? Was that a car backfire?
Did you hear that?
As they're standing there, just trying to put it together what might have happened, they hear a second pop, and then...
Oh my God, oh my God. Oh my God. Oh my God.
Ambulance.
Across town, Lieutenant Joe Kenda is winding down after another long day.
It was the time of night when it was time for me to get some sleep if I could. Then the phone rings and you go, no bed tonight.
This is Kenda.
I never seem to get the criminals who break the law in the morning. Oh, no.
That store again?
It's always the cover of darkness.
All right, I'm on the way.
"15 minutes later, Kenda arrives at the scene and is greeted by Detective Brian Ritz.
So here we are again, huh?
Here we are again.
Who do we got this time?
Victim's ID'd as Willie McKay. He's 20. Took a gunshot wound to the chest, probably an exit wound, and then collapsed inside the store, and he's at Memorial Hospital right now.
What'd happen?
Witnesses say it happened over here in the lot, and then he walked inside the store. What we don't know is exactly where in the lot he actually got shot.
Usually with a firearm, you get some kind of shell casing. So we're looking for physical evidence that might help identify the exact location of the scene.
Even if investigators happen to find shell casings in the parking lot, there's no guarantee they were discharged during this particular incident.
It's been an open-air drug market in that particular area for quite a few years, no matter what police efforts have been put in there.
It would not be uncommon to find expended casings and slugs in this parking lot that had nothing to do with the shooting of Willie McKay.
But then, Kenda hits pay dirt.
Hey, Brian. Hey, we got 2 380 casings. We got drops of blood here. They look fresh. Might have happened right here. How you doing? We got 2 casings. You want to go ahead and process those?
Yes, sir.
The EMTs mentioned the exit wound, right?
We did.
Let's see if we can find a slug.
The human body is very dense, so a great deal of the energy of the bullet is absorbed by passing through the body and is generally close in the area where the victim was found. We searched the lot and we do find a perfectly formed .380 caliber slug.
Think this is our guy?
It's got to be him. Look there. Still got bullet wipe on it.
Bullet wipe is human blood that is seared onto the surface of the slug by the heat of this projectile passing through the body at supersonic speed.
We're pretty sure that we're looking at the bullet that struck our victim.
Hey, Lieutenant. We got a witness back here. Says he basically saw the whole thing go down.
I'll go talk to him. Why don't you go inside and see what you can find out?
All right.
The uniformed officers at the scene introduced us to an individual named James McGraw.
Mr. McGraw?
Yes.
I'm Lieutenant Kenda. I understand you were outside when this all happened?
I was standing over there by my car.
It was pretty crazy to see this all unfold. I kind of knew something bad was about to happen. I just had a gut feeling. And all of a sudden, this car pulled up, and two guys kind of got into a rumble. They were going at it for like a few seconds, and then the dude pulled out the gun and shot it up in the air. I was frozen. I couldn't really move. I was just kind of stuck in the moment.
After that, all hell kind of broke loose. Then I saw another guy get into a guy's face and throw a punch. And at that point, I heard a second gunshot.
Hurry up, man. Get in this damn car.
The guy was standing in the parking lot like he was in a total daze. So then he made his way towards the convenience store. I kind of started to make my way in there. When I walked into the store, the victim had fallen to the floor, and it was blatantly obvious he had a chest wound.
Can one of you get a paper towel or a rag or something? Hang in there, buddy.
I'll never forget the sound of the gurgling and the breaths he was taking. I mean, it was really hard to watch.
Hang in there, buddy.
You happen to hear anything they were saying, any names?
No. All I know is there was really bad blood between these people.
This confrontation goes to the max the minute those people arrive, which is a clear indicator that there is prior involvement between these individuals, and they don't like each other.
Thank you for your cooperation. He's free to go.
Wrap this.
After questioning James McGraw, Kenda enters the store, where Detective Ritz has located another key piece of evidence.
At this point in 1995, convenience stores have gotten wise to the fact that it's handy to have video cameras mounted, mostly because they get robbed so much.
Witnesses make mistakes, witnesses get emotional, witnesses don't see things that are there to be seen. Cameras see everything.
So who was working the counter, Claretta?
Yeah, I just talked to her. She says the cameras are all working.
Good, I told her after the last time they need to be fixed.
She went to get the tapes.
Here you go, Joe.
Excellent. Thanks, Claretta.
Good luck.
Appreciate it. Yeah, we'll take a look at these when we get back to the station.
Yeah.
First, let's go to the hospital, see if we can find out anything about the victim.
Sounds good.
At Memorial Hospital, detectives learn Willie McKay is hanging on by a thread.
Ritz and I go to the intensive care unit waiting room, and we find Tina Parker, who is Willie's sister.
How are you, Miss Parker? We're all hoping that Willie pulls through. And I know it's a very difficult time, but there's a few questions that we need to ask.
He's a good brother. He's been down on his luck a little bit, but he didn't deserve this.
We asked him, do you know if your brother, Willie, has any enemies or people he's had trouble with in the recent past?
You know, there's this guy named D. They've been going at it for a while.
Is that his name, D?
That's what everyone calls him. I don't know his name personally, but there's been bad blood. I've seen it with my own eyes. About 2 weeks ago, I was taking the trash out behind our place.
What's up with that? You trying to bring me down?
Ain't talking if it's true, cuz.
Keep talking, man. Best to shut your mouth.
Or what?
So now we not only have D hating Willie, D has a gun.
After they were fighting, Willie just went back inside the house. D, I don't know where he went.
While we're talking with Tina, the intensive care unit doctor comes in, and it's pretty clear to us he has something serious to tell her.
I'm sorry. We did everything we could. We just couldn't save your brother.
I'm very sorry.
As we were leaving, I just said to her, I will find who hurt your brother. That's what I do.
Back at headquarters, detectives hope the security tapes from the convenience store will be the key to identifying Willie's killer.
Go.
You have to keep in mind, at that point in time, this was old, grainy, black and white tape.
The quality is just awful. Somebody's own mother couldn't recognize them in this tape.
Can't make out what's going on.
It's like just a lot of pushing and shoving.
Yeah.
The tape clearly shows an altercation in the store's parking lot, but that's just about the only thing that is clear. However, the video's not entirely useless.
What's that in the rear window of the car the shooter's getting in?
Almost looks like a temporary tag.
Well, that means the car's been purchased in the last month.
Yeah, but from where?
It looks like a Honda.
How many could there be? They were sold to an African-American between 28 and 30 years of age who goes by the nickname D.
We have to hope that it's a local dealer, but it is at least a lead.
What the dealer can probably produce for us is a name. And once I have a name, we're in business. We're investigating the shooting death of Willie McKay at a local convenience store. Right now, the only leads I have are a grainy video and a guy who once threatened Willie, who goes by the name of D.
The following morning, Detective Brian Ritz returns with an update.
So it turns out that car was leased not 3 weeks ago to a guy named Dirk Waters.
Wonder if Dirk Waters is our man D.
Dirk Waters' home address is less than 3 blocks from our crime scene. You can go check it out?
Sure. Oh. Kenda here. Really? Okay, be right down. And get this. Looks like we don't have to go looking for Dirk Waters.
You're kidding.
Yeah, he's downstairs with somebody. Says they want to come forward as witnesses.
Our fortune increases dramatically.
How you doing? I'm Lieutenant Kenda, this is Detective Ritz.
How you doing? I'm Dirk Waters. How you doing, sir? Dirk Waters.
Hi, Angela Cutter. Hey.
I understand you two were outside when Willie McKay was shot?
Yes, sir. We just came here to explain to y'all what we witnessed.
We don't have any probable cause to believe this guy is a suspect. And in our initial conversation, it's really more of a conversation, not an interrogation.
But all of that changes in an instant.
When we saw in the newspaper this morning that the guy died, I told Dee we should go to the police and say something.
Well, my.
You go by D?
Yes, sir, I did.
We now know that this is at least a good suspect.
Angela, why don't you go with Detective Ritz? Mr. Waters, if you'll come with me.
Okay. So you always separate individuals so that there's no collusion going on between the storytelling.
Have a seat.
So tell me about last night.
It was me and a group of friends just kicking it at the apartment. By around 9 o'clock, me and Angela decided we wanted to get some snacks from the store. There was a guy, Junior, at the apartment. Didn't really know him, but, you know, he was like a friend of a friend. He decided to ride with us.
Dirk Waters explains that while Angela was inside the store, he and Junior were hanging out in the parking lot.
We were kicking it outside, and next thing you know, Willie pulled up.
Them ain't real gold, so, bro, yo, y'all gonna stop coming. You know these guys? You know these guys? Swing Will, let me go swing
You know I
Will.
said don't call me that. Hey, bro, back there.
So Willie just came out of nowhere? Why? Do you know him?
Waters explains that he knows Willie from a social perspective.
Met him through a friend. But lately, you know, he's just been tripping, just bugging out on me. Saying I have a thing for his sister.
I understand it, yup. So they comfortable? Yeah, they very comfortable. Like walking here.
Dana! What's going on? Talk to me.
Hey, bro, what's up if you having eyes for my sister, dog? Bro, you a married man, cuz you know you can't be doing that.
You better watch your mouth, boy.
Maybe I should call the MPs down at Fort Carson, man. Let them know you've been cheating on your wife.
This infuriates Waters because he had been in the Army for 8 years. He intends to make the Army his career. The military has very strict rules about adultery. They see it as a crime.
Sounds like he really pissed you off. Pissed enough to shoot him?
I didn't shoot him.
Here's the thing. We have eyewitnesses that saw you fire a gun after fighting with him a couple weeks ago. Are you saying that wasn't you either?
He immediately admits to it.
Yeah, I did it.
I was so angry, I pulled out a handgun that I had and I fired in the air to make Willie go away.
So at the store, maybe that was a chance to finish things once and for all?
I'm telling you, man, I didn't shoot him. It looked weird, but I ain't shoot that guy. As soon as we heard the gunshot, we got the hell on, me, Angela, and June.
Dirk goes on to explain that people in the neighborhood, they all know that there's bad blood between Willie and I. And when I saw in the paper that Willie had died, I thought I better get down here to the police station and explain myself.
That's why I came down.
In an adjoining interview room, Detective Ritz is pressing Angela for her version of what happened.
I didn't know anyone actually got shot until I read it in the paper this morning.
Is that right?
Angela tells me she's inside the convenience store. She hears the commotion and she hears the shot. As she comes out of the convenience store, Dirk grabs her and Junior and says, "Let's get out of here."
So you didn't see the shooter?
No.
All right, what happened next?
We just dropped Junior off at some corner, and then we went back to my friend's apartment.
Okay, where's Junior now?
I don't know.
Told you I just met the guy. I haven't seen him since.
When people talk to me in difficult circumstances, I believe no one. You're saying A, I hated Willie. You're saying B, I fired a gun within 3 feet of Willie on a prior occasion 2 weeks ago. But oh, I didn't fire this gun.
Even though Kenda and Ritz have their doubts about Dirk and Angela's story, they have nothing concrete on which to hold them.
Nothing led to probable cause to believe that they had committed a crime. So we took their statements and subsequently let them go out the front door of the police station.
Dirk Waters still remains at the top of Kenda and Ritz's suspect list until a tip comes in that takes the investigation in a whole new direction.
Hey, Lieutenant. So we just got a phone call from somebody asking if we'd picked up David Reese yet for the murder of Willie McKay.
Who's David Reese?
I pulled his file. He's a late 20s African-American male, just got out of prison. Can you guess his alias?
Junior.
Bingo.
Well, now that fits very nicely. Because Dirk says, and Angela says, the third person in the car was Junior.
What do you know? Maybe our friend Dirk was telling us the truth after all.
Don't ever assume you're right until you know you are. There is never, ever an end until you reach it. This investigation all along has said that Dirk, aka D, is the person we're looking for. But now we've discovered there's another individual who may be the one. What I don't know yet is what his motive is.
Our informant also told us that Junior here is staying in an apartment complex over on the east side.
Okay, let's set up on that place, see what kind of activity's going on before we move in. All right? Thanks.
Less than an hour later, Detective Brian Ritz is on the east side with his eyes fixed on a ground floor apartment.
It's a very important part of police work, is sometimes just watching, listening, and looking.
Someone approaches the apartment door, but it's not who Ritz was expecting.
I'm looking for a black male to go into this room, and I see a young white female, something we didn't expect.
We're dealing with an anonymous informant. How accurate is this? Well, there's only one way to find out.
It's time to end the stakeout and start making contact. You're not going in with guns drawn or anything like that, because it could be completely innocent. But you're on alert.
May I help you?
Ma'am, my name's Detective Brian Ritz. What's your name?
Where are you based?
Ms. Bates, I'm looking for Junior. Do you know him?
Yeah, Junior's my boyfriend.
Is he here?
No?
Do you mind if I come in for a second?
Sure. So how may I help you, Detective?
How long have you known Junior?
A few months now.
I'm investigating the shooting down at the mini-mart the other night.
Miss Bates says she happened to be with Dee, Junior, and Angela the night that Willie got shot.
We were at one of Junior's friends' apartments, and we were just, drinking and chilling.
Maria painted a scene in which everybody was drinking. Dee was playing around with a gun, and he was getting more and more agitated, talking about this person he knew that was telling lies about him.
Forget that. Trying to snitch on me, talking about cheating on my wife. You know what that'd do to my career? They give me a dishonorable discharge.
When did they leave?
I don't know exactly what time, but they did go to make a liquor and snack run. They came back about an hour later.
She said when they came back,
What is going on with your face?
Junior had a cut
Oh, what
on his
happened?
face,
Hit you?
and that everybody was very upset.
What's going on, guys?
Nothing.
Come on, let's just get out.
Yes, I'm calling to see if Willie McKay was admitted.
Hey, man, come on. Baby, nothing. I ain't talking to her.
Oh. He's dead.
What happened after that?
Junior and I left.
Where is he now?
I don't know. I haven't seen him since yesterday.
We need to hear from you if you see him again, if he calls, anything.
Sure.
Appreciate that.
We have a statement from Angela that they dropped Junior off on the road and then went home. Now we have Maria saying that Junior, Angela, and Dee showed up at the apartment.
Detective Ritz wonders, had Dirk and Angela been lying during their initial interview? Or was Maria lying to them now in order to cover for Junior? Kenda finds out the answer that afternoon.
We recovered enhanced images from the videotape. They're certainly not perfect, but it's clear in one of these photos that when Willie comes in and falls across the counter, Angela is standing inside the store.
Kenda decides it's time to haul Angela Cutter back down to the station for another interview.
I don't think you've been truthful with us.
What do you mean?
Well, you said you didn't hear Willie been shot until you'd read it in the newspaper. Looks to me like he's bleeding out right in front of you. Why don't you just tell me the truth? You know who shot Willie.
It was Junior. He shot him. I was afraid to say anything because, Junior just got out of prison. I thought he'd come after me and Dirk if we snitched.
She finally says that when this confrontation happens, Willie and Dee are yelling at each other. And Junior pulls out a gun and fires a shot in the air.
Angela tells Kenda that after Junior fired that first shot, Willie McKay took the confrontation to the next level.
Junior is a street person. He's been in jail. He doesn't tolerate this behavior from people. You hurt me? Watch this.
So you won't shoot me?
Willie then staggers inside the store.
Kenda and Ritz have what they need to arrest David Reese, aka Junior. Reese is ultimately convicted of manslaughter and sentenced to 16 years in prison. Dirk Waters and Angela Cutter are never charged.
Human emotion is an incredible thing. It can create circumstances that result in violent death. This particular case, Willie McKay's anger and emotions were out of control, and he paid the ultimate price for it.
Coming up, a vicious attack leaves an elderly man on the brink of death. The case seems cut and dried, but Kenda smells a rat.
If you lie to me, I'm going to find out, and you're not going to like it when I do.
After helping win a conviction in a hard-fought double homicide case, Lieutenant Joe Kenda is celebrating with a little light housekeeping.
It's always a very good feeling when you end a case with the incarceration of the accused. But those moments of success can be interrupted by someone walking into your office and telling you what your next problem is.
Hey, Lieutenant, I just got something. I think you're going to be a part of this.
What's up?
A woman just called from the hospital, and she claims that her 97-year-old father, John Howard, was attacked.
What the hell? 97?
What a horrible thing. 97 years old and you've been assaulted? How could this be? Well, it's easy, really. There are humans on this planet.
What's his condition?
Not really sure, but it doesn't sound good.
Let's get down there.
When you get a call like this, various scenarios start running through your mind.
We only know what we've been told. He's been assaulted, and he may die as a result.
Hello, I understand you have John Howard here?
Yes, he was admitted 9 days ago.
9 days?
I'm troubled by the fact that we're 9 days into this before we even know about it. Time is your enemy in criminal investigations.
Yes, he was admitted due to blunt force trauma to the side of his head. His jaw was broken in 2 spots.
How is he now?
Not well. He went through surgery okay, but he was so weakened that he got pneumonia. He's in ICU.
Surgery is difficult at any age, but it's very difficult for an elderly person to survive pneumonia. He's basically near death.
Would it be possible to speak to him?
Sure, he's in room 114, just down the hall.
Thank you.
Inside John Howard's room, Kenda meets the man's daughter, Jamie, who's keeping vigil by her father's side.
Jamie Howard?
Yes.
I'm Lieutenant Kenda, the Detective Arms. You called us?
Yes.
How's your father?
He's stable. It's tough, but he's a fighter.
Jamie, can you tell us exactly what happened?
Well, he's been a patient at Norton's nursing home for about 8 years. And I thought it was a great place until today. No, I don't know.
Jamie explains that earlier that morning she drove down from Denver for a surprise visit with her father. But when she arrived at the nursing home...
Hey, Dad? Dad? Hey, Dad?
Her dad was nowhere to be found.
What the hell? Where's my father? John Howard.
John Howard?
Yes.
He fell and hurt himself. He was taken to St. Francis Hospital. Been there over a week.
A week? Why didn't somebody tell me?
I'm sorry.
She immediately drove to St. Francis Hospital and was horrified when she saw the condition her father was in.
Daddy.
The bandaging, the bruising, the respirator, intensive care. He looked horrible.
Daddy, what happened?
Fist in eye.
What she heard him say was simply fist in eye. He didn't make any other comments, and that's all she heard.
I looked at him in the bed, and there's not a mark on his arm. The only mark is on his face. Unless he found a way to fall and land on his face only, he didn't fall down.
Somebody did this to him. And I find it a little weird that they didn't immediately tell me about it.
Well, you did the right thing by calling us. We'll get to the bottom of it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is it an accident? Is it intentional? Could be either one. We are beginning with an injured patient. We have to end with an explanation for how this injury occurred.
Detectives begin their investigation at Norton's nursing home, where John Howard's injury allegedly took place.
We see a 30-something nurse talking to a woman in her 70s. And as we approach, the young nurse nervously walks away immediately.
Excuse me. Yes. I'm Lieutenant Kenda, Detective Arms, from the Colorado Springs Police Department. Can we speak to the manager here, please?
Oh, that would be me, Olga Pratt. I'm the owner and head of nursing here.
Ma'am, we're investigating an injury to one of your residents, John Howard, about 9 days ago. I understand he fell.
Yes, that was quite a fall.
Nurse Janet York told Olga what she witnessed.
She walked by Mr. Howard's room and heard some moaning coming from inside the room.
Mr. Howard? Hello? Oh my God! Mr. Howard, Kenny, what happened?
I don't know. He must have hit his head on the toilet. I just turned around for a second to grab something and I heard him fall.
Nurse Janet and the orderly, Kenneth Brzezinski, helped Mr. Howard to his bed.
Janet thought it was best to get an ambulance, so she called 911, and he was immediately transported to St. Francis.
I'm always curious about who is present when bad things happen. Where is Kenneth Brzezinski right now?
Can we speak to Kenneth?
Oh, he's not here. If a patient is injured in the care of an orderly, well, the policy is immediate suspension.
Ms. Pratt, I have to tell you that according to John's daughter, he said he was punched.
She says, well, Mr. Howard has been a difficult patient.
Mr. Howard has quite the reputation for making up stories around here.
On many occasions, he has claimed abuse by orderlies, but in every one of those cases, it was just orderlies doing their job, and no one abused him.
Okay, well, we'll be in touch. Thank you.
Of course.
That afternoon, detectives run a background check on Kenneth Brzezinski.
So what do you got so far?
37. He was an Army vet. He's worked at the nursing home for 6 months, but his record there is spotless and no prior arrests.
I want to get a hold of Mr. Brzezinski and see what he has to say.
So I intend to get an explanation from him as to exactly where he was when this injury occurred. Did he witness the fall or only the aftermath?
Hey, sorry, didn't mean to interrupt you guys.
As I was considering that, a knock comes on the door.
There's a woman out front, goes by the name of Janet, said she would like to speak with you.
Send her in.
Yes, sir.
Well, that's the witness and assistant to his injury. And she is further the very same nurse I just saw at Norton's, who nervously walked away as we presented our badges.
Thanks for coming in. Have a seat.
Thank you.
So I didn't get a chance to talk to you earlier. You kind of scurried away?
Yeah.
I wanted to remind her that I knew she'd walked away from me, and she was immediately nervous again.
So what can we do for you?
Well, I have some information on John Howard. It's important, but I don't know what to do.
Well, if it was important enough to bring you here, that's important enough to tell us.
His injury, it wasn't a slip and fall.
Well, my, Janet. Now we're getting into an area that I understand well. We're investigating an injury that occurred to a 97-year-old nursing home patient when a nurse named Janet York comes forward to my office to say that she knows this entry was not the result of an accidental fall.
So what exactly happened?
I was walking by Mr. Howard's room when I heard moaning. So I went in.
What's going on? What happened to his face?
Guess I lost it. I hit him.
Janet tells Kenda that the man who assaulted Mr. Howard was the orderly, Kenneth Berzinis.
Well, thank you for coming. We'll take care of this. Skip, why don't you go over to the nursing home and have another chat with the owner, Miss Pratt. I'll send Fiorello to pick up Mr. Berzini.
Yes, sir. Right this way, ma'am.
So I assign Detective Ken Fiorello to locate and arrest Kenneth Berzinis for one count of assault on the elderly.
Excuse me, are you Kenneth Berzinis?
Yeah.
Detective Fiorello, I need to ask you some questions about what happened to John Howard.
Look, I'm not gonna lie to you. Somebody hit him.
Well, let's talk about it at the station.
From the outset of his interview, Kenneth Berzinis seems eager to tell the truth.
Okay, Kenneth, let's start from the beginning. Go ahead and tell me what happened.
Okay, I started working at the nursing home about 6 months ago. I was warned about Mr. Howard that he could be difficult. But I'm a vet. Compared to what I went through in Vietnam, this was nothing. All right, how are we doing today, Mr. Howard?
What are you doing?
Oh, come on. No reason to get upset. It's a nice day outside.
Close the window. Get the hell out of here.
What he needed to do was to get Mr. Howard out of bed so he could sort of remake the bed. When he tried to do that, Mr. Howard was resisting his efforts and was screaming and yelling.
I told you, you idiot.
All of a sudden, out of the corner of my eye, I saw Mr. Howard raise his fist. Something in me just, oh my God, triggered.
So you mean to tell me you couldn't dodge a punch thrown by a 97-year-old man?
I don't know what happened. I'm sorry, and I'm ashamed. I know he was hurt really bad. I didn't mean to react that way.
Okay, Kenneth, I believe you. But Olga says that you told her that he slipped and fell in the bathroom. Now, why lie about that?
Berzinis looked at Fiorello in absolute shock and said, I told her I hit him. And I hurt him badly, and I was afraid that maybe I killed him.
I never lied. I told Olga exactly what I told you, I swear.
Okay, Kenneth, I believe you. I do. Thank you for being honest with us.
With Kenneth Berzinis' confession in tow, Kenda sets his sights on a bigger fish, Olga Pratt.
We have a conspiracy that involves the owner of a nursing home. How deep does this go?
Other staff told us that there in fact had been a meeting that was held at the nursing home.
This whole thing with Mr. Howard, it was a terrible accident. And that's going to be our story. Got it? Anything else gets out, this place is ruined.
Armed with these additional statements implicating Olga Pratt in the cover-up, Kenda puts the squeeze on her.
Thanks for coming in, Miss Pratt. There were just a few things you wanted to go over.
How can I help you, detectives?
We just need a little clarification on what happened to Mr. Howard. He fell in his bathroom. Is that right?
That's right. He took quite a spill, so obviously we had him taken to the hospital right away.
That's strange. That's not what Kenneth Berzinis told us. He says he told you that he hit Mr. Howard.
Well, quite frankly, Lieutenant, you'd be a fool to believe anything Kenneth Berzinis has to say.
You know, right away you could see that she had an attitude. She was smug, and it was almost like an insult to her that we were questioning what she had already told us.
Well, I guess we're fools then, because I believe he's telling the truth. And we talked to several of your staff members that confirmed it.
Olga Pratt is willing to do anything to save her business and herself. Now, is it against the law to lie to the police? No, not against the law to do that. But it's against the law to engage in a conspiracy to conceal assault on the elderly, and that's what we're going to charge her with.
Miss Pratt, I'm afraid you're under arrest.
What? Arrest? What for? But I haven't done anything.
Miss Pratt, please come with me.
No, this is outrageous. I have responsibilities.
Olga Pratt is convicted of accessory to crime and conspiracy to commit accessory to crime. She is sentenced to 4 years probation.
The scary reality of this case is that we're all vulnerable, especially when you're old and can't really take care of yourself, that you're putting your life basically in strangers' hands.
As for Kenneth Berzinis, he is also sentenced to probation and ordered to serve 2 years in a work release program.
I feel sorry for Kenneth Berzinis. He had emotional issues from serving his country in Vietnam, and he's been completely cooperative. But the fact remains he assaulted and nearly killed a 97-year-old man with his bare hands. And you have to be punished for that.
Despite his trauma, John Howard makes a full recovery and lives out the rest of his days in Colorado Springs, albeit at a different nursing home.
I believe this case was ultimately driven by greed. Olga Pratt made the decision that all of this should be concealed from the authorities, believing it would never come to light. Had it not been for the concerns of a daughter, she might have been right.
It begins with a sound almost no one remembers anymore. A phone ringing in the dark. 3 times. Then silence. On a cold October morning in 1994, the house on Hawthorne Street sat perfectly still, lights off, curtains drawn, as if it were holding its breath. Neighbors would later say nothing looked wrong. No broken windows. No screams in the night. No sign that this address would soon become a name whispered in grocery stores, printed in bold ink across local newspapers, and etched into the collective memory of a small Ohio town that never quite slept the same again. Inside that house, something had stopped. 29-year-old Emily Carter had failed to show up for work. She was never late. She never missed a shift. By 9:30 a.m., her supervisor made the call. By 10:15, her sister was dialing again and again, listening to the same hollow ring echo into nothing. By noon, the police were at the door. They knocked. No answer. They knocked again. When officers finally entered the home, the air felt wrong. Too quiet. Too clean. No overturned furniture. No blood on the walls. The television was off. A mug sat on the kitchen counter, cold coffee dried along its rim. Her purse was still there. Her car still in the driveway. Her keys on the hook by the door. Emily Carter was gone. No signs of forced entry. No struggle. No note. Just absence. By sunset, the word missing had already begun to harden into something heavier. Helicopters cut across the sky. Search dogs traced circles through nearby woods. Volunteers fanned out with flashlights, calling her name into fields and drainage ditches. The local news interrupted programming with a developing story. A young woman vanished without a trace. Community shaken. Police baffled. Within 48 hours, the phrase, "cold case," hadn't been spoken yet, but the fear was already there. Emily wasn't a drifter. She wasn't transient. She had roots. Family. Friends. A routine that barely changed. She worked at a medical billing office downtown, lived alone, drove the same route every day, shopped at the same grocery store every Thursday night. Her life followed lines. Predictable. Measurable. And then those lines stopped. Detectives began where they always did. Interviews. Friends. Co-workers. The ex-boyfriend, inevitably. Nothing stuck. Everyone described the same woman, quiet but warm, cautious, not reckless, not the kind to disappear voluntarily. No debts. No known enemies. No recent arguments worth mentioning. The house told no story. No fingerprints out of place. No signs of a hurried departure. Even the bed looked slept in, sheets folded back the way they always were. It was as if Emily had stepped outside for a moment and simply never came back. Then came the first strange detail. In the bathroom trash can, beneath used tissues and an empty toothpaste box, investigators found a single latex glove. Inside out, no matching pair anywhere in the house. It didn't belong to Emily. Her sister was certain. Emily hated latex. A small thing. Easy to overlook. Easy to dismiss. They bagged it. Logged it. Moved on. Days passed. Then weeks. Tips flooded in at first. A woman seen at a bus station. A figure resembling Emily walking along Route 23. A clerk who thought she recognized her face, but couldn't be sure. Every lead dissolved under scrutiny. Every sighting collapsed into doubt. The town began to change. Parents walked their children to school. Doors locked earlier. Porch lights stayed on longer. Conversations lowered when patrol cars rolled by. People began to glance at their neighbors differently, measuring, wondering, calculating how well they really knew the people next door. By December, the searches slowed. By January, the headlines shrank. By spring, the case file thickened with paperwork but thinned of hope. Emily Carter had vanished into the quiet. Years rolled forward. Detectives rotated. Leads dried up. Evidence aged in cardboard boxes. The latex gloves sat in storage, labeled, cataloged, untouched. DNA technology existed, but it was slow, expensive, and rarely deployed for cases without bodies, without blood, without something solid to justify the cost. The file was stamped inactive. A cold case in everything but name. Emily's family never moved on. Her sister kept the house exactly the same for months, then years, as if preserving it might preserve the chance of answers. Her mother called the department every anniversary, every birthday, every rumor that flickered briefly through town. Each time, the answer was the same. No updates. No suspects. No closure. By the early 2000s, Emily Carter's disappearance had become a story told to newcomers, like a warning. A mystery without an ending. A question mark buried beneath newer crimes, newer fears, newer tragedies. But evidence doesn't forget. It waits. In 2019, a young evidence technician was assigned to audit long-term storage, boxes untouched for decades, some mislabeled, some nearly forgotten. Old cases, old hopes, old failures. One by one, she opened them, cataloging contents for digitization. When she reached the Carter file, she paused. Inside-out latex glove. Single item. No body. No blood. No suspect. Just potential. DNA testing had changed. Costs had dropped. Databases had grown. What once felt impossible now felt overdue. She flagged the glove for analysis. No one expected much. When the results came back weeks later, they didn't match Emily. They matched someone else. A man with no criminal record. No direct connection to Emily Carter. A name that hadn't appeared once in the original investigation. The kind of name that doesn't jump out. The kind that hides in plain sight. The kind that forces detectives to reopen a file they thought would never breathe again. And for the first time in 25 years, the Carter case was no longer quiet. It was awake. And whatever truth lay buried in Ohio since 1994 was about to push its way back into the light, whether the town was ready for it or not. The name arrived without drama, printed in black ink on a sterile lab report, slipped quietly onto a detective's desk like an afterthought, yet it carried a weight that bent the room around it. Michael Harlan, 46 years old, lifelong Ohio resident. No priors. No arrests. No fingerprints on file from any crime scene. A man who had lived his entire adult life without ever brushing against the criminal justice system in a way that mattered. The kind of person police rarely look at twice. The kind of person who survives by not being memorable. Detectives stared at the page longer than they should have. Not because the name rang bells, but because it didn't. It sat there, inert, refusing to explain itself. No obvious connection to Emily Carter. No shared workplace. No shared address. No family overlap. Nothing that screamed motive, opportunity, or history. And yet his DNA had been inside her house, sealed within a latex glove she never used, discarded in her bathroom trash on the day she vanished. That fact alone was enough to fracture the calm. They reopened the case quietly at first, wary of stirring a town that had learned to live with unanswered questions. Old files were pulled from storage. Yellowed interview notes resurfaced. Cassette tapes were digitized, voices from the 90s crackling back to life, repeating statements that had once sounded ordinary and now felt suspicious in their banality. Detectives retraced Emily's last known movements with fresh eyes, mapping her final hours against a landscape that had barely changed. Michael Harlan lived less than 8 miles from Hawthorne Street in 1994. 8 miles. 12 minutes by car. Back then, he worked maintenance for a private property management company. His routes were inconsistent. His hours flexible. His job placed him in and out of residential neighborhoods without drawing attention, carrying keys, wearing gloves, fixing things no one wanted to think about. The perfect cover for being somewhere you weren't supposed to be, at a time no one would remember clearly. In the original investigation, maintenance workers had never surfaced as a category worth scrutinizing. Too broad. Too common. Too many men with tool belts, and no reason to stand out. The oversight wasn't malicious. It was human. And now, decades later, it felt catastrophic. Detectives began reconstructing Harlan's life as it had existed in the fall of 1994. Old employment records were requested. Payroll logs. Work orders. Addresses serviced. The paper trail was thin, brittle with age, but it existed. On the morning Emily Carter disappeared, Harlan had been scheduled for unspecified maintenance in a cluster of homes less than a mile from her street. Unspecified. Unverified. Unremembered. No one could say with certainty where he'd been that morning. His supervisor from that time had passed away years earlier. Co-workers had scattered across states, memories dulled by time and distance. There were no GPS records. No cell phone pings. In 1994, the world didn't leave a digital shadow behind it. It was the perfect storm for a man who wanted to disappear into the margins. Detectives approached Harlan carefully. Not with sirens. Not with warrants. Just a knock on the door of a modest ranch-style home on a quiet street that looked indistinguishable from every other street in the county. When he answered, he seemed surprised, but not alarmed. Polite. Cooperative. Curious in the way people are when they assume nothing bad could possibly involve them. He said he didn't know Emily Carter. Said he'd never been inside her house. Said he had no idea how his DNA could have ended up there. When asked about the glove, his face barely changed. "I wore gloves all the time back then," he said. Maintenance work. You don't think about it. The answer slid by too smoothly, too rehearsed for a question he claimed had never crossed his mind before. Detectives noted it, filed it away, pressed gently but persistently. Where was he that morning? He wasn't sure. It had been a long time. Did he keep records? No. Did he remember Hawthorne Street? Maybe he'd driven past it. Maybe he'd worked nearby. Hard to say. Nothing he said was provably false. Nothing he said was reassuring. They collected a voluntary DNA sample. It matched the glove perfectly. A statistical certainty so high it erased coincidence from the conversation entirely. The man sitting across from them had been in Emily Carter's bathroom at or near the time she disappeared. The room tightened around that fact, squeezing the air out of every alternative explanation. Still, there was no body. Without a body, the case remained fragile. Prosecutors are wary of ghosts. Juries want blood, bones, something tangible they can hold onto. A glove was circumstantial, powerful, but not definitive. Investigators needed more. Something that anchored Michael Harlan to Emily Carter's final moments in a way that couldn't be shrugged off as contamination or error. They went back to the house. The Carter home had been sold twice since Emily vanished, renovated, repainted, reimagined by families who knew the story but believed themselves immune to it. Still, the bones of the place were the same. The bathroom layout unchanged. The plumbing original. Detectives focused on drains, pipes, forgotten corners that rarely receive attention. Modern forensic techniques have a way of finding things people assume are long gone. Trace fibers were pulled from beneath baseboards. Microscopic fragments recovered from inside the drain trap beneath the sink. Among them, a single hair, degraded, incomplete, but not useless. Partial mitochondrial DNA testing linked it to Emily's maternal line. She had been there. Struggling. Close enough to leave pieces of herself behind. The implication hung heavy and suffocating. When confronted again, Michael Harlan's demeanor shifted. Not dramatically. Not explosively. Just enough to notice. His answer shortened. His eyes lingered on the table instead of the detectives. He asked questions about process. About timelines. About what evidence they really had. People don't ask those questions unless they're calculating. Investigators dug deeper. Financial records. Old phone bills. A landline registered to Harlan had made a call at 7:42 a.m. on the day Emily disappeared, to a number that once belonged to a payphone 2 blocks from her house. The call lasted under a minute. No content. No recording. Just proof of proximity. Emily's neighbors were re-interviewed. Older now. Slower to recall. But one memory surfaced, fragile and insistent. A white utility van parked briefly on Hawthorne Street that morning. No logos. No markings. Just there, then gone. At the time, it had meant nothing. Now, it meant everything. Harlan had driven a white utility van in 1994. Piece by piece, the story tightened. Not enough to tell anyone exactly what happened to Emily Carter, but enough to suggest she hadn't vanished into thin air. Enough to suggest someone had been with her. Someone who had planned for gloves. Someone who had relied on the world's indifference to maintenance workers and quiet men. Still, the case hovered in a dangerous space between suspicion and certainty. And then, buried in a box mislabeled and nearly discarded, investigators found a cassette tape from 1995. An anonymous tip. A man's voice, distorted slightly by cheap recording equipment, describing a woman who wouldn't stop screaming, and a mistake that was never supposed to go that far. At the time, the tip had been dismissed as a hoax. Listening to it now, With Michael Harlan's name echoing through the case file, the voice sounded uncomfortably calm, uncomfortably familiar. And for the first time since 1994, detectives allowed themselves to think the unthinkable, that Emily Carter's disappearance was not an unsolved mystery, but a carefully buried crime, waiting decades for the right moment to surface. That moment was getting closer. And whatever truth Michael Harlan had been carrying for 25 years was beginning to crack under the weight of evidence that refused to stay forgotten. The tape changed the temperature of the room. It wasn't dramatic. No shouting. No panic in the voice. Just a man speaking slowly, deliberately, as if rehearsing lines meant only for himself. The audio wavered with static, the software of a cheap cassette recorder breathing between sentences. Detectives listened in silence, each of them aware that what they were hearing had been ignored once before, dismissed as noise in a case already drowning in it. "I didn't mean for it to happen," the voice said. She kept yelling. "I just needed her to stop." In 1995, those words had floated through the department without anchoring to anything solid. No name. No address. No follow-up call. Anonymous tips were common. Most were junk. This one had been filed, labeled forgotten. Now, with Michael Harlan's DNA linking him to Emily Carter's bathroom, the tape felt radioactive. They ran the voice through modern enhancement software. Cleaned the static. Isolated frequencies. It wasn't enough for a definitive match, but patterns emerged. Cadence. Pacing. A subtle hesitation before certain consonants. Linguistic analysts compared it to recordings from Harlan's recent interviews. The conclusion was cautious. Inconclusive. But troubling. Detectives returned to Harlan's past with renewed urgency, searching for fractures they'd missed the first time. They learned he had lived alone in 1994, recently divorced, neighbors describing him as quiet, private, sometimes abrupt. No close friends. No visible social circle. The kind of man who left little emotional footprint behind him. They also learned something else. In late 1993, Emily Carter had reported a maintenance issue in her rental home. A recurring plumbing problem in the upstairs bathroom. The work order had been handled through a third-party property service. The name of the technician assigned was missing from the surviving paperwork, a blank where a signature should have been. The absence felt deliberate. Detectives cross-referenced schedules, addresses, old invoices. It wasn't proof, but the timeline bit inward on itself. Michael Harlan had serviced multiple properties owned by the same management company that leased Emily's house. He denied ever being there. Denied recognizing her name or address. But denial has a way of sounding hollow when time erodes the confidence behind it. They pressed harder during the next interview. Asked about the plumbing. About latex gloves. About the cassette tape. Harlan's jaw tightened. His answers came slower now, measured in a way that suggested calculation rather than confusion. He asked again about what evidence they had. What they could prove. Whether they were planning to charge him. People who are innocent ask if they're in trouble. People who are guilty ask how much trouble they're in. The conversation stalled, locked in a stalemate neither side could afford to break. Without a body, prosecutors still hesitated. The case was stronger than it had ever been, but not strong enough. Circumstantial threads, no matter how tightly woven, can unravel under the wrong scrutiny. Then came the call no one expected. A woman in her 70s contacted the department after seeing a news segment about the reopened Ohio 1994 cold case. She said she hadn't spoken up before because she didn't think it mattered, because she didn't want to get involved, because she was afraid of being wrong. Her name was Linda Moore. In 1994, Linda lived 3 houses down from Emily Carter. She remembered the morning Emily disappeared with a clarity that startled even herself. She had been awake early, unable to sleep, sitting at her kitchen table with coffee growing cold in her hands. Around 8 o'clock, she heard raised voices outside. A man. A woman. Not screaming. Not yet. Just tense. Sharp. Controlled anger cracking at the edges. She looked out her window. She saw Emily standing near the side of her house, close to the driveway, facing a man she didn't recognize. He wore work clothes. Dark jacket. Gloves. He stood too close. Close enough that Linda felt uncomfortable just watching. She told herself it was nothing. A contractor. A disagreement. None of her business. Then she saw the van. White. Unmarked. Parked halfway down the street. She watched the man guide Emily toward it, a hand on her arm that looked gentle enough to pass as concern. Emily resisted briefly. Just a step. A hesitation. Then they disappeared from Linda's line of sight. The van pulled away minutes later. Linda never saw Emily again. For 25 years, Linda had carried that image like a stone in her chest, convincing herself it couldn't have meant what it now clearly did. When detectives showed her a photograph of Michael Harlan from the early 90s, her hands began to shake. "That's him," she said. "That's the man." The statement didn't solve the case, but it shifted it. Witness testimony anchored suspicion to reality in a way no lab result ever could. A jury could understand a neighbor at a window. A van on a quiet street. A moment that felt wrong even then. Detectives went back to Harlan for what everyone knew would be the final interview. This time, he asked for a lawyer. Silence followed. Weeks passed. The case hovered in limbo, tension coiled tight enough to snap. Prosecutors debated strategy. Risk a charge without a body and gamble everything, or keep digging and hope something else surfaced before time or resources ran out. Then, during a routine financial review, an analyst noticed an anomaly buried deep in Harlan's old bank records. In November of 1994, weeks after Emily disappeared, Harlan had withdrawn a large sum of cash. Nearly his entire savings. No corresponding deposit. No clear reason. Shortly after, he moved apartments abruptly, breaking his lease and leaving behind furniture and personal items he never returned to collect. People don't empty their savings for no reason. People don't abandon their lives without fear. Investigators searched storage units registered under his name. Most were empty. One wasn't. Inside, beneath layers of dust and forgotten junk, they found a rolled-up tarp, stained in places that time had turned brown. Forensic testing was ordered immediately. The results came back positive. Human blood. Degraded. Incomplete. But real. Not enough to identify conclusively. Not enough to say whose it was. But enough to turn the pressure into something unbearable. Enough to make the past feel very close, very present, and very dangerous for a man who had survived by staying invisible. The walls were closing in. And somewhere beneath all the evidence, beneath the decades of silence, the truth about what happened to Emily Carter was no longer buried deep. It was right there. Waiting. Just one crack away from spilling out. Interrogation rooms are built to feel smaller than they are. Bare walls. Neutral colors. Nothing to rest your eyes on. Time collapses inside them. Michael Harlan had avoided that room for 25 years. He'd lived his life carefully, quietly, believing that silence, if maintained long enough, eventually becomes truth. Now he sat under fluorescent lights that hummed softly above his head, his attorney beside him, his hands folded, posture rigid, as if control alone could keep the past from catching up. Detectives didn't rush. They never do when they know they're close. They slid photographs across the table without commentary. The Carter house, Hawthorne Street, the bathroom, the inside-out latex glove sealed in plastic, the tarp from the storage unit, brown stains blooming across its surface like shadows that refuse to fade. Harlan looked. He didn't react. Not yet. They spoke about time instead, about memory, about how the brain edits its own history to survive, about how people convince themselves that if enough years pass, events become hypothetical, abstract, harmless. "You don't remember Emily Carter," one detective said calmly, "but your DNA does." Harlan shifted in his chair. A subtle movement, almost nothing. But after decades of interviewing men who lie for a living, detectives recognize the first fracture when it appears. They told him about Linda Moore, the neighbor, the window, the van. That was when his breathing changed. It wasn't panic. It was calculation under pressure, the mind searching for exits that no longer exist. His lawyer leaned in, whispered something. Harlan nodded once, sharply, as if agreeing with himself more than anyone else. Still, he said nothing. They played the tape. The cassette's hiss filled the room first, followed by the voice, calm, restrained, disturbingly ordinary. "I didn't mean for it to happen." Harlan's eyes dropped to the table. His jaw tightened, muscles working as if chewing on something bitter. "That's not me," he said finally. The words landed flat, weak, a statement without conviction. "No one said it was," the detective replied. "Yet." They let the silence stretch. Silence is heavier when you know it's being measured. They began to talk about mistakes, about how crimes rarely start the way they end, about how a bad decision can snowball into something irreversible, about men who never planned to kill anyone but found themselves trapped by what they'd already done. Harlan's lawyer objected. Procedural language, formalities. The detectives backed off just enough to stay within the lines. They weren't fishing for a confession. They were tightening the net. Outside the room, prosecutors debated timing. The evidence was converging, but the case still hinged on a single, terrifying absence, Emily Carter herself. Without her body, the story remained incomplete. A puzzle missing its center. And then the ground shifted. Forensic results from the tarp returned with more detail than expected. Advanced testing identified a secondary DNA profile mixed with the blood. Partial, degraded, but consistent with Emily Carter's mitochondrial lineage. Not definitive enough for court on its own, but powerful enough to alter the conversation entirely. She hadn't vanished. She had bled. Detectives re-entered the interrogation room with a different energy now. Less patient, less gentle. They placed the lab report between Harlan and his attorney. "She was alive when you took her," one detective said quietly. "And she didn't leave your van on her own." Harlan's composure cracked. Not shattered. Cracked. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for a paper cup of water. He took a sip, swallowed hard, then set it down without meeting anyone's eyes. "You don't know that," he muttered. "We know enough," the detective replied. "And we're not done." The pressure mounted from all sides. Media interest surged as leaks spread. Headlines resurfaced. Cold case reopened. New suspect identified. Community shocked after decades of silence. The town that had learned to live with uncertainty felt it stirring again, restless, angry, desperate for answers it had been denied for so long. Search warrants followed. Investigators combed through land records connected to Harlan's past, properties he'd accessed, lots he'd visited repeatedly for no clear reason, places that sat just outside populated areas, forgotten by most. Cadaver dogs were brought in. Soil samples collected. Ground-penetrating radar swept fields and wooded patches that had changed shape over decades, but not purpose. Most searches turned up nothing. Until one didn't. Behind an abandoned pump station 30 miles from Hawthorne Street, dogs alerted near a shallow depression hidden beneath invasive brush. The area had been disturbed once, long ago, then left to heal over time. Excavation began carefully, methodically, every inch documented. They found bone fragments first, then more. Small, fragile, human. The remains were incomplete. Time, moisture, and animals had done their work. But dental records confirmed what everyone already felt in their bones. Emily Carter had been there. Left there. Forgotten by the world that failed to look hard enough when it still mattered. The news broke like a detonation. For Emily's family, it was devastation wrapped in relief. Proof at last. Proof she hadn't abandoned them. Proof that the years of waiting hadn't been madness. For the town, it was a reckoning. The realization that the danger had never been some faceless monster, but a man who'd driven its streets, fixed its pipes, smiled politely when spoken to. Michael Harlan was arrested without incident. At the station, stripped of his routines and his assumptions, he looked smaller, older, the illusion of control gone. This time, there was no lawyer in the room when detectives sat down across from him. He'd waived counsel after hours of consultation, a decision that felt less strategic than exhausted. They didn't push him. They let him talk. He spoke in fragments at first. Defensive. Minimizing. He said he hadn't planned it. Said Emily had been upset about the plumbing, about being alone in the house with him. Said things escalated. Said she screamed. Said he panicked. The details spilled out unevenly, contradicting themselves, correcting, reshaping as he went. He admitted to taking her in the van. Admitted to driving aimlessly before pulling off near the pump station. Admitted to striking her when she wouldn't stop fighting. He never used the word kill. He didn't have to. When he finally fell silent, the room felt hollow, as if the truth itself had drained the air away. 25 years of not knowing collapsed into a single, brutal narrative that could never be undone. Emily Carter's case was no longer unsolved. But resolution doesn't erase damage. Outside, the community grappled with the aftermath, the anger, the guilt, the knowledge that signs had been there all along, subtle and easy to ignore. A glove. A van. A voice on a tape no one took seriously enough. The cold case had cracked. And what spilled out wasn't justice, not really. It was the unbearable weight of time wasted, of truth delayed so long it arrived too late to save anyone, only to haunt everyone left behind. The town didn't explode when the arrest became public. It imploded. Shock didn't arrive screaming. It crept in quietly, through front doors left ajar, through radios murmuring in kitchens, through phone screens lighting up in the early hours with headlines no one was ready to read. Ohio 1994 cold case cracked. Suspect arrested after decades. Human remains found. People reread the words again and again, as if repetition might dull their edges. Michael Harlan had lived among them for years after Emily Carter disappeared. He'd bought groceries at the same stores, stood in line at the DMV, nodded politely to neighbors. He wasn't a stranger dragged in from somewhere else. He was familiar in the most dangerous way, ordinary enough to never be noticed. Emily's family learned the news in pieces. A phone call that began with hesitation. A pause too long to mean anything good. When detectives confirmed the remains were hers, her sister closed her eyes and felt something she hadn't expected. Relief. Not the gentle kind. The violent kind that crashes through grief and leaves it rearranged. Relief that the waiting was over. Relief that doubt no longer had room to breathe. Relief that Emily hadn't chosen to disappear. But relief didn't soften the loss. It sharpened it. The funeral was small. Private. No body to lay to rest, only fragments returned after decades underground. Photographs stood in for presence. Emily smiling. Emily alive. Emily frozen forever at 29, untouched by the years everyone else had been forced to live. Outside the church, cameras waited. The trial preparations moved fast, fueled by public pressure and a prosecution that now had what it needed: a body, a confession, a narrative juries could follow from beginning to end. The defense shifted strategy almost immediately, pulling Harlan's earlier statements apart, questioning the conditions of his interrogation, the reliability of memory after trauma, the contamination potential of decades-old evidence. They argued panic. They argued accident. They argued anything but intent. Inside the courtroom, the air was thick with something heavier than anticipation. It was expectation, the kind that demands a reckoning, that wants the past rewritten in the language of accountability. Jurors listened as prosecutors laid out the timeline with clinical precision. The maintenance call, the gloves, the van, the neighbor's testimony, the tape, the tarp, the remains. Each piece alone might have wavered. Together, they formed a chain no one could ignore. When Linda Moore took the stand, her voice trembled but didn't break. She described the window, the voices, the way her instincts had whispered that something was wrong even as her mind convinced her to look away. The defense pressed her on memory, on time, on the fallibility of perception. She answered simply, "I remember because I never stopped seeing it." The tape was played in court. The jurors sat still, faces unreadable, as the voice filled the room again. Calm, regretful, detached. The defense objected. The judge overruled. The sound lingered, echoing off wood and glass, pulling everyone backward into a moment that had been sealed away for decades. When Michael Harlan testified, he avoided the gallery. His story shifted subtly under cross-examination, details sliding, reshaping themselves in response to pressure. He spoke of fear, of mistakes, of not knowing how things had gone so wrong so fast. The prosecution didn't raise their voices. They didn't need to. They asked about the gloves, about the choice to drive instead of flee, about the decision to hide her body instead of calling for help. Each question stripped another layer of accident from the narrative. When the verdict came back, it didn't surprise anyone. Guilty. The word landed with a finality that felt almost unreal after so many years of uncertainty. Emily Carter's name was spoken aloud in the courtroom, tied at last to a conclusion rather than a question mark. Michael Harlan was sentenced to life without parole. He showed no visible reaction. Outside, reporters scrambled for reactions, for sound bites, for something that could translate decades of pain into a headline. But the people of the town didn't have words ready. Justice, delayed as long as this, doesn't feel triumphant. It feels heavy. It feels incomplete. In the weeks that followed, routines resumed in cautious increments. Children returned to walking home alone. Porch lights clicked off earlier. Conversations grew louder again. But something had shifted permanently beneath the surface. People talked more openly about the day Emily disappeared, about the moments they dismissed, about the instincts they'd ignored because it was easier to believe nothing bad could happen here. The cold case had cracked, but it left behind fractures that wouldn't heal cleanly. Emily's sister sold the house on Hawthorne Street. She said she needed distance, a different sky. a place where the walls didn't remember. Before she left, she stood in the bathroom one last time, staring at the spot where a glove had once changed the course of everything. She wondered how something so small could carry so much consequence. Some questions still had no answers. Why Emily? Why that day? Why did it take so long? The court had delivered a verdict, but it couldn't return what was taken, couldn't erase the years stolen by silence and delay. Closure, it turned out, wasn't a door that shut. It was a weight you learned to carry differently. The case file was finally closed. Stamped, filed, archived. But long after the headlines faded, long after the cameras packed up and left, the story of Emily Carter remained, a reminder etched into the town's memory, a cautionary echo about the cost of overlooked evidence and voices unheard. A cold case solved doesn't end. It lingers. And in Ohio, the year 1994 would never fully let go. After the verdict, silence returned to Ohio, but it was a different kind of silence. Not the hollow, unanswered quiet that had stretched across decades, but a low, uneasy hush, like the pause after a storm, when everyone steps outside to assess what's still standing. The courthouse emptied. The microphones disappeared. Michael Harlan was transported to a facility hours away, his name reduced to an inmate number, his face already beginning to fade from public consciousness. But Emily Carter did not fade. Her photograph remained on desks, mantels, bulletin boards. The image most people remembered wasn't from the trial exhibits or news broadcasts, but an older one, grainy, slightly off-center, her smile unguarded, caught in a moment before the world learned how to take her from herself. That smile became a symbol of something the town struggled to articulate. Innocence interrupted, routine shattered, normality exposed as fragile. Investigators thought they were done. They were wrong. In the weeks following the conviction, the department conducted an internal review, the kind required whenever a cold case stretches across generations and ends in public reckoning. They revisited the original investigation step by step, not to assign blame, but to understand how time had slipped through their hands. The glove resurfaced again in conversation. Why hadn't it been tested sooner? Why hadn't it raised alarms in 1994? The answer was uncomfortable. Back then, it had been logged as possible contamination. Maintenance workers wore gloves. So did cleaners. The house had been rented before. Without blood, without a body, it hadn't screamed urgency. It whispered, and whispers are easy to miss in busy rooms. The tape, too. An anonymous voice. No follow-up. No corroboration. In the 90s, hoaxes came in waves, especially in missing person cases. The tape had been one more burden in an overloaded system. No one had the time, or the tools, to hear what it would later become. Hindsight sharpened everything. Detectives who'd worked the case in its early days were interviewed. Older now. Retired. Some defensive. Some quietly haunted. One admitted he still thought about Emily Carter when he couldn't sleep. Another said he'd kept her file in his garage for years, flipping through it late at night, convinced he'd missed something obvious. They all had. And yet, none of them alone. That truth settled heavily over the department. The case hadn't failed because of one bad decision, but because of 100 small ones, each understandable in isolation, devastating in combination. Outside law enforcement, the town grappled with its own reckoning. Linda Moore stopped sleeping well after the trial. The memories she'd carried silently for decades, once locked behind self-reproach, now played louder than ever. She replayed the morning of Emily's disappearance again and again, wondering how differently things might have turned out if she trusted her instincts instead of her fear of being wrong. People thanked her. That didn't help. Survivors of other unsolved cases in nearby counties began reaching out, asking questions, sharing stories, hoping that Emily's case might be a blueprint for their own. Some brought forward tips they'd never reported. Others asked if evidence from the 90s could still speak now. The answer, unsettling and hopeful all at once, was yes. Emily Carter's name began appearing in law enforcement conferences, training sessions, internal memos. A case study. An example. A warning. Forgotten evidence doesn't expire. Silence doesn't neutralize guilt. Time doesn't forgive. It just waits. In prison, Michael Harlan refused all interviews. He filed appeals instead. They were technical, procedural, claims of coerced confession, mishandled evidence, contamination risk. His attorneys argued that decades-old DNA could not be trusted, that memory had been reconstructed under pressure, that the confession had been shaped by leading questions. The appeals failed one by one. Courts don't reverse cases like this easily, not when confession, physical evidence, and witness testimony align. Still, the process dragged on, reopening wounds, forcing Emily's family to relive details they'd hoped to leave behind. Emily's sister attended none of the appeal hearings. She said she'd already spent enough of her life listening to his voice. On the anniversary of Emily's disappearance, a small vigil formed on Hawthorne Street. Candles lined the sidewalk. People stood quietly, some who remembered Emily, some who only knew her through headlines and whispers. No speeches. No cameras. Just names spoken softly into the evening air. When the candles burned low, no one rushed to leave. They stood there, grappling with the same realization that closure, like truth, arrives unevenly. That solving a case doesn't restore what was lost. It simply stops the bleeding from spreading further. And beneath that realization was something else, something more unsettling. Michael Harlan had lived undetected for decades. Which meant he hadn't been watched. Which meant investigators had to ask the question no one wanted to voice out loud. Had Emily Carter been the only one? The department reopened other unsolved files from the same period. Missing women. Assault reports that never went anywhere. Complaints about a maintenance worker who made tenants uncomfortable. Notes scribbled in margins, too vague to act on at the time. Patterns began to suggest themselves. Nothing conclusive. Nothing chargeable. But enough to chill the room. Sometimes justice arrives too late to save the first victim, but just in time to prevent another name from being added to the list. Emily Carter's case had closed a door, but it had also opened others. And as detectives stared into those newly opened files, they understood something with painful clarity. The past doesn't stay buried unless everyone agrees to stop digging. And now, no one was willing to stop. The files didn't scream when they were reopened. They whispered. Manila folders pulled from metal drawers. Papers softened by time. Ink fading where urgency once lived. Names that never made headlines. Faces that never stayed long enough in the public eye to become symbols. Each file carried the same weight as Emily Carter's once did, potential, stalled by uncertainty. Detectives laid them out across long tables under harsh lights. Missing persons from the early 90s. Unresolved assaults. Complaints written off as misunderstandings, exaggerations, bad dates, bad feelings. The kinds of reports that survive on the margins, too thin to prosecute, too troubling to forget. One detail kept surfacing. Maintenance access. Apartments. Rental homes. Temporary repairs. Men with keys and excuses. Men allowed inside because the alternative felt unreasonable. Paranoid. Inconvenient. Michael Harlan's employment history became the spine of a new timeline. Every property, every service call, every stretch of unaccounted time. Investigators plotted locations on maps layered by year. Patterns didn't leap out at first. They never do. Patterns require patience. Then a name appeared twice. Rachel Donovan. Reported missing in 1992. Age 24. She'd lived alone in a rental unit serviced by the same management company. Her disappearance had been quieter than Emily's. No family nearby. No consistent job. Police assumed she'd left town. Started over. The file had closed itself through neglect rather than decision. Her apartment had been released within weeks. Cleaned. Repainted. No evidence preserved. But there was a note in the margins of her file. Tenant complained about maintenance worker making her uncomfortable. No further action. The handwriting belonged to a clerk long retired. Detectives cross-checked dates. Harlan had serviced that building 2 days before Rachel vanished. No proof. No body. No confession. But the proximity pressed hard against coincidence. Another file followed. Angela Perez. 1995. Attempted abduction. Escaped. She described a man in work clothes, gloves, driving a white van. He tried to get her inside under the pretense of a plumbing emergency. She fought. She screamed. A neighbor intervened. The man fled. At the time, the report went nowhere. Now, it read like a warning sent too early to be understood. Angela was located. Older. Guarded. Still angry. When shown a lineup that included an aged photograph of Michael Harlan, she stared at it longer than necessary. "That's him," she said finally. "I never forgot his eyes." It still wasn't enough for new charges. Too much time. Too many gaps. But it reframed the past in a way that made Emily's case feel less isolated, less random. Not a lightning strike. A pattern interrupted. The revelation unsettled the town all over again. The idea that Emily Carter might not have been alone in her encounter with Harlan introduced a darker truth. That opportunity, not chance, had governed his actions. That silence had protected him not once, but repeatedly. Emily's sister was told about the reopened files. She listened quietly, then asked a question no one else had voiced. "Did anyone ever apologize?" The answer was no. Institutions don't apologize easily. They explain. They contextualize. They cite limitations. But apology requires acknowledging that different choices might have saved someone. That truth sat uncomfortably with everyone involved. As investigators pushed forward, they also hit walls. Some records were gone. Lost in floods. Destroyed by routine purges. Some witnesses had died. Some had moved and couldn't be found. Time had done its work efficiently, erasing edges, softening outlines. Michael Harlan was questioned again about the other cases. He said nothing. No denials. No explanations. Just silence. Sometimes silence is strategy. Sometimes it's relief. In the absence of new confessions, the department faced a grim reality. Emily Carter's case could expand contextually, morally, historically, but legally, it would remain singular. One conviction. One sentence. The rest would exist as shadows around it, impossible to fully illuminate. The media circled the idea of a serial offender, careful with language, but hungry for implications. Experts debated classifications. Opportunistic predator versus serial killer. Escalation versus interruption. The terms mattered less than the underlying question. How many moments like Emily's had passed unseen? The town felt it too. Parents spoke differently to their children now. Not just about strangers, but about trust, about assumptions, about how danger doesn't always announce itself. Safety meetings were held. Rental policies changed. Background checks tightened. None of it felt sufficient, but it felt necessary. Late one evening, a detective revisited the Carter house alone. The new owners were away. The place was quiet, unchanged in shape if not in spirit. He stood in the bathroom, staring at the space where a glove had once rested unnoticed. He thought about how evidence ages. How meaning doesn't always arrive when it's needed, only when it's ready to be understood. Cold cases aren't puzzles. They're echoes. Each answer sends a sound back through time, colliding with moments where different choices could have bent outcomes in gentler directions. Emily Carter's echo had grown loud enough to demand reckoning. Others might never reach that volume. That was the truth no training manual prepares you for. Justice is uneven. It arrives late. Or partially. Or not at all. And as the department prepared to close its secondary review, one final document surfaced, an internal memo from 1994, and signed, warning about a contract maintenance worker who had received multiple informal complaints across properties. The name had been redacted. The copy was the only one left. No one could say for certain whose name it had once carried. But everyone in the room knew. Emily Carter's case had cracked open more than a mystery. It had exposed a system that listened only when noise became unbearable, and how much suffering can pass quietly beneath that threshold. The files were returned to storage. Some questions, once asked, never truly leave. They wait. Just like the evidence once did. Years after the conviction, the story refused to settle. It resurfaced in small, persistent ways. A documentary pitch declined, a podcast episode delayed, a journalist calling back months later with one more question they couldn't let go. Emily Carter's name had become shorthand for something larger than her own life, a reference point whenever someone spoke about evidence overlooked, instincts ignored, time wasted. And with every retelling, the same unease crept in. Not about what was known, but about what never would be. The pump station site was sealed after the excavation, marked, logged, then reclaimed by weeds and weather. Investigators returned once more with improved technology, hoping soil samples might yield something new, something definitive. They didn't. Time had stripped the land of clarity. Whatever answers it held had been diluted beyond recovery. Emily's remains were finally laid to rest beside her father, who had died years before the truth surfaced. Her mother lived just long enough to attend the burial, standing quietly as the casket was lowered, her face calm in a way that frightened those who loved her. She passed 6 months later. Some said from illness. Others believed she'd simply finished waiting. The legal system moved on. Michael Harlan's appeals ran out of oxygen. His final petition was denied without comment. No press release. No fanfare. Just a stamped order filed and forgotten among thousands of others. He was transferred again, deeper into the system, farther from the places where his name still meant something. In prison, he kept to himself. He declined counseling, declined programs, declined visitors. Guards described him as compliant, unremarkable, invisible, a man who had perfected the art of disappearing long before anyone realized he needed to be found. Once, during a routine psychological evaluation, he was asked a question required by protocol. "Do you feel remorse?" He paused. Then he said, "I feel tired." The answer was noted. Nothing more. Back in Ohio, the department implemented changes born directly from Emily's case. Old evidence was retested. Anonymous tips were digitized instead of buried. Maintenance access protocols were rewritten. None of it could travel backward in time. None of it could touch 1994. But it reshaped everything that came after. Detectives spoke openly now about the danger of assumptions, that people with keys are safe, that calm voices are harmless, that crimes look violent when they begin violent. Emily Carter's case had taught them otherwise. That escalation can be quiet, that planning can look like routine, that the most dangerous moments often masquerade as inconveniences. At a training seminar years later, a young officer raised a hand and asked a question that cut through the room. "How do you live with the ones you don't solve?" The instructor didn't answer immediately. "You don't," he said finally. "You carry them, and you hope carrying them makes you sharper next time." The town itself changed shape in memory. New families moved in, unaware at first of the history beneath their feet. Some learned later. Some never did. Hawthorne Street looked like any other street now. Trimmed lawns, fresh paint, children riding bikes past a house that no longer belonged to tragedy, at least not visibly. But the people who remembered felt it still. They felt it when a white van slowed too long at a curb, when a repair request required letting a stranger inside, when silence stretched just a second too far. Emily Carter's story became a caution passed down quietly, not to frighten, but to remind. Listen when something feels wrong. Document what seems small. Don't wait for noise. On the 20th anniversary of her disappearance, a local paper ran a short piece. No headline in bold. No exclamation. Just a paragraph near the back. Emily Carter's case remains one of Ohio's most consequential cold cases, a reminder that justice delayed is still justice demanded. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't enough. But it was honest. Some nights, former detectives from the case still dreamed about alternative endings. Emily opening her door to no one. The glove noticed sooner. The tape taken seriously. The van stopped before it left the street. These versions played out in their minds with cruel clarity, offering relief only to pull it away again. That's the cruelty of solved cases. They don't stop imagining. They simply change what the imagination circles around. Emily Carter's cold case had been cracked, yes. Evidence remembered. Truth delivered. A man held accountable. But the story it left behind was larger and more unsettling than any single conviction. It asked whether society is willing to listen before tragedy speaks loudly enough to demand attention. And it left behind a final, enduring silence, not empty, not unanswered, but heavy with everything that had arrived too late to matter when it mattered most. The case was closed. The echo was not. Time didn't soften the edges the way people expected. It sharpened them. As years passed, Emily Carter's case stopped being news and became reference, cited in meetings, footnoted in reports, mentioned in the careful language of reform. But beneath that professional distance, something restless persisted. A sense that the story, even now, was still incomplete. Not legally. Not procedurally. Emotionally. Because endings that arrive late never arrive clean. Emily's sister moved twice after leaving Hawthorne Street. New cities. New jobs. New routines. She learned which questions to answer and which to sidestep. When people asked if it helped, knowing the truth at last, she would pause before responding. "It helps you stop guessing," she said once. "It doesn't help you stop missing." She kept one box from her old life. Inside it were letters Emily had written in college, postcards from road trips, a voicemail saved on an obsolete device that she no longer knew how to play. Evidence of a life interrupted mid-sentence. Proof that victims are never just case numbers, even when cases become famous. At the police department, a new generation of detectives arrived who knew the Carter case only through training modules and archive footage. To them, it was resolved history. To their predecessors, it was still present tense. The difference showed in how they spoke about it, some clinically, others carefully, as if volume alone might reopen wounds. One retired detective refused to attend seminars where the case was discussed. "I did my learning in real time," he said. "I don't need the rerun." But others leaned into it. They believed Emily's case carried a responsibility, that if suffering had occurred, it should at least produce vigilance. They told recruits about the glove, the tape, the neighbor at the window. They emphasized how close the answers had been all along. Closer than anyone wanted to admit. The maintenance company that had employed Michael Harlan no longer existed. It dissolved quietly in the late 90s, absorbed into a larger firm, records scattered or destroyed. Lawsuits were discussed, then abandoned. Too many years. Too many unknowns. Liability evaporates when time erases fingerprints. Still, policy changes spread outward. Landlords revised access rules. Tenants were given clearer rights. Small protections, late in coming, but meaningful to those who understood why they existed. Occasionally, someone would claim to have seen Michael Harlan in prison documentaries or true crime specials. His image appeared briefly, usually blurred, usually without commentary. Viewers searched his face for something, guilt, emptiness, regret, and came away dissatisfied. He never explained himself beyond what was required. He never filled in the gaps. That absence became its own kind of wound. Psychologists talk about narrative hunger, the human need for stories to resolve not just facts, but meaning. Emily Carter's case starved that hunger even in resolution. There was no manifesto, no dramatic confession, no moment where everything suddenly made sense. Just a sequence of choices. A knock on a door. A glove pulled tight. A van idling. Ordinary acts arranged into something irreversible. On anniversaries, discussions resurfaced online. Comment sections filled with arguments about whether the signs should have been obvious, whether neighbors should have acted, whether police should have pushed harder. Hindsight made everyone bold. Certainty bloomed easily after danger passed. Those closest to the case avoided the debates. They knew how thin the line had been. How easy it was, in real time, to choose the wrong explanation because it felt safer than the right one. One former investigator described it best. "Evil doesn't always look like danger," he said. "Sometimes it looks like inconvenience." The town erected no monument for Emily Carter. No plaque. No bench. Her family asked that there not be one. They didn't want her remembered as a place people visited briefly and forgot. They wanted her remembered privately, correctly, as someone who existed beyond what happened to her. And yet, remembrance has a way of finding its own form. A scholarship was created in her name at a local community college, funded quietly, focused on students pursuing healthcare administration, the career Emily had been building toward. Each year, a new recipient learned her story, not in detail, but in outline, enough to understand the cost of interruption. Life moved forward. That's what unsettles people most about resolved tragedies, the way the world absorbs them and continues anyway. Stores open. Streets fill. Children grow up without knowing the names of the people whose absence shaped the rules meant to protect them. Emily Carter became one of those shaping absences. A presence defined by what was no longer there. Late one night, long after the case files had been archived for the final time, a detective opened the digital record again. Not out of duty. Out of habit. He scrolled through evidence lists, transcripts, scanned photos. He stopped at the image of the glove. Inside out. A small thing. A nearly invisible thing. He wondered how many other gloves existed in other houses, other files, other forgotten corners of storage rooms. How many answers were waiting for someone patient enough to notice them? Cold cases don't haunt because they are unsolved. They haunt because they prove how close the truth can be and how easily it can be missed. Emily Carter's case no longer asked who or how. It asked when people decide to listen. And whether next time that moment would arrive before silence had time to do its damage. There is a moment, long after a case is closed, when responsibility outlives relevance. It happens when the files are no longer requested, when no one calls for comment, when the story slips from collective urgency into institutional memory. That's when the people who were there, truly there, feel the weight settle in. Not as guilt exactly, as vigilance sharpened by regret. Emily Carter's case reached that moment quietly. The department stopped receiving inquiries. Training modules were updated one last time. The evidence boxes were sealed, barcodes scanned, storage locations finalized. The system did what systems are designed to do. It absorbed the anomaly and moved forward. But the individuals did not. One detective began keeping a notebook. Not official. Not admissible. Just questions. Hypotheticals. Names from other cases that bothered him without quite knowing why. He wrote them down the way some people write prayers, not expecting answers, but afraid of forgetting what mattered. He wasn't alone. Across the state, similar notebooks existed. Drawers filled with half-remembered details. Cases that never crossed thresholds. Moments that lingered because something about them felt unfinished. Emily's case had given those feelings legitimacy. Proof that instincts, even quiet ones, deserve space. The ripple effect spread farther than anyone anticipated. A woman in another county reopened a box she'd kept sealed for 30 years. Photos, receipts, a key she never remembered needing. Her sister had gone missing in 1991. The case stalled. Life moved on. Watching a documentary on Emily Carter's cold case made her pause. Not because the stories were the same, but because the pattern felt familiar. She called police the next morning. Nothing came of it. No arrest. No revelation. But the call itself mattered. It added weight to a growing truth. That silence survives because it feels safer than being wrong, until it doesn't. Emily's name surfaced in academic journals, in discussions about procedural justice, in debates about evidence retention and the ethics of delay. Scholars wrote about how her case illustrated the danger of compartmentalizing. Low priority. Anomalies. A glove. A tape. A neighbor's unease. Low priority until they weren't. In prison, Michael Harlan aged quickly. His hair went gray. His posture collapsed inward, as if gravity had finally found him. He spoke to no one about Emily Carter. Not in letters. Not in grievances. Not even in anger. The absence of explanation became his final act of control, a refusal to give the world anything more than what it had taken from him. Psychologists noted the behavior, then moved on. Some people don't seek absolution. They seek erasure. Outside, Emily Carter existed only in fragments of memory now. Fewer people remembered her voice. Fewer remembered her habits. Time did what time always does. It narrowed her presence to essentials, sanding away detail while preserving impact. And yet, impact endured. Every so often, a young officer would ask why her case was still discussed when so many others weren't. The answer never came from policy manuals. "Because we almost missed it," someone would say. "And because next time, we can't." That sentiment became the unofficial epitaph of the case. Not closure. Not justice. Responsibility. The town itself seemed to understand this intuitively. No annual ceremonies. No public reckoning. Just subtle shifts in behavior. a readiness to ask questions that once felt impolite, a willingness to trust discomfort instead of dismissing it. That may have been Emily Carter's last contribution to the world. Not the way she died, but the way her absence taught others how to pay attention. Late one evening, the detective with the notebook closed it for the final time. He'd filled every page. Some names were crossed out. Some weren't. He placed it in a locked drawer and turned off the light. Cases don't end when the truth is told. They end when people change because of it. Emily Carter's case had done that, quietly, unevenly, imperfectly, but undeniably. It had shifted the threshold of what was worth noticing, worth preserving, worth believing. The cold case was solved. The lesson remained active. And somewhere beyond Ohio, in places where gloves still go unnoticed and tapes still sit unheard, that lesson waited, patient, persistent, for the moment someone decided not to look away. Years pass, but certain nights refuse to release their grip. They return without warning, in the pause between radio stations, in the hum of fluorescent lights, in the way a street looks empty even when it isn't. For those who lived through the Emily Carter case, those nights carried a familiar weight. Not fear. Not suspense. Something quieter. The awareness that truth, once uncovered, does not undo what time has already taken. The house on Hawthorne Drive was sold again. Fresh paint. New siding. A young family moved in, unaware of the history beneath their feet. No plaque. No marker. Just drywall and memory sealed behind it. The market listing never mentioned a cold case, never hinted that a life had unraveled there decades earlier. Real estate has no room for ghosts. But the neighbors remembered. They remembered the sirens that didn't hurry. The questions that came too late. The stretch of silence that followed. They remembered how easy it had been to assume the ordinary explanation. How comforting it felt to believe nothing truly terrible could happen on a quiet street in Ohio. That belief never fully returned. Emily Carter's story continued to circulate, not as headline news, not as breaking alerts, but as a reference point. A cautionary tale whispered between professionals. A reminder passed down, like folklore among investigators, who understood that the most dangerous cases are the ones that look harmless at first glance. She became shorthand. A Carter-type delay. A Carter oversight. A Carter moment. Her name no longer belonged only to her. It had become a concept, a marker for when intuition is ignored and routine takes over. In archives, the file remained pristine, digitized, cross-referenced, indexed by year, location, and classification. Solved cold case, stamped neatly in the metadata. The system was satisfied. Human memory was not. A retired dispatcher admitted, years later, that she still replayed the original call in her head. The cadence. The background noise. The way the caller hesitated before giving the address. She wondered if that hesitation had meant something, or if she had simply imagined it because the ending demanded significance. Memory does that. It edits the past to survive the present. At conferences, when the case was discussed, someone always asked the same question: what was the moment it could have changed? The room would fall quiet, not because there wasn't an answer, but because there were too many. The glove could have been tested sooner. The tape could have been logged correctly. The neighbor could have been pressed harder. The assumption could have been challenged. Justice, it turns out, is rarely delayed by one mistake. It's delayed by a chain of reasonable decisions that quietly align in the wrong direction. Michael Harlan died in custody on a winter morning, years after his conviction. Heart failure. No final statement. No confession beyond what had already been extracted by evidence and circumstance. His death barely registered outside a brief notice. another inmate, another line of text. But for some, his silence in death felt heavier than any words he could have spoken. He took motives with him. He took certainty. He took the one version of the truth that might have explained why. Emily Carter never got that answer. Her family learned to live without it. They learned that justice does not always bring peace. Sometimes it only confirms loss. That knowing what happened does not restore what was taken. It only changes the shape of the grief. On the anniversary of her disappearance, they stopped holding gatherings. Not out of forgetting. Out of fatigue. Mourning, sustained long enough, becomes private. Sacred. Too fragile for repetition. Emily's room no longer existed. Her belongings had been distributed, donated, or discarded. Objects lose meaning when no one remembers how they were used. Still, every so often, someone would find a photograph, a school picture, a candid smile, and feel a momentary jolt of recognition, followed by the quiet realization that they were remembering someone the world had already moved past. That is the final cruelty of time. It does not erase tragedy. It normalizes it. And yet, even normalized, Emily Carter's case refused to disappear completely. Because unresolved questions lingered at its edges. Not about who did it, but about how close the truth had come to vanishing forever. If the box had been discarded, if the tape had degraded, if one person had chosen convenience over curiosity, those hypotheticals haunted the professionals who understood their implications. They knew how many cases balanced on similar margins. One mislabeled item, one overlooked call, one assumption left unchallenged. The lesson wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cinematic. It was procedural. And that made it dangerous. Because procedure is where urgency goes to die. Emily Carter's case reminded them that urgency must sometimes be protected, actively, deliberately, or it dissolves into routine. That attention is a finite resource. And that what gets missed is often what looks least remarkable. Late at night, when the world quiets and distractions thin out, those who knew the case best felt its echo. Not as a narrative, not as a mystery, but as a presence, a reminder that every file represents a life paused mid-sentence. A woman who never grew older. A story interrupted. A future permanently conditional. The cold case was closed. The truth was documented. The system moved on. But somewhere between evidence lockers and memory, Emily Carter remained, not as a victim frozen in time, but as a warning written into the margins of modern justice. Pay attention. Question the ordinary. Listen when something feels wrong. Because silence is never empty. And the next case, the one still waiting, still unnoticed, is already beginning, quietly, in a place that looks just like this one once did. Silence is not the absence of sound. It is the presence of everything that chose not to speak. Long after the reports were filed, long after the verdict hardened into record, the Emily Carter case continued to exist in that silence. Not loudly, not insistently, but with the kind of persistence that settles into the bones of a place. Ohio moved forward. Streets were repaved. Stores changed names. Children who weren't yet born in 1994 grew up without ever hearing her story unless someone decided to tell it. And most didn't. Because unresolved pain, even when partially answered, is inconvenient. It disrupts the illusion that time fixes what humans fail to address quickly enough. It reminds people that certainty is fragile, that safety is often retrospective. Yet the case never fully slept. In evidence rooms across the country, technicians began treating old materials differently. Not because of policy mandates alone, but because of fear, the quiet fear of being the person who let something essential decay unnoticed. Labels were double-checked. storage conditions reevaluated, digital backups created not just once, but redundantly, obsessively. Emily Carter had become a ghost in the machine. Her absence altered behavior. That is how legacies truly work. Not through memorials or headlines, but through adjustments so small they seem insignificant until they compound across years and jurisdictions. A pause before discarding an object. A second listen to a degraded recording. A decision to reopen a file that doesn't technically demand it. All because one case proved how close the truth can come to vanishing. The town itself carried on, with an unspoken understanding. No one said her name often, but when they did, the tone changed. Conversations slowed. Jokes fell away. Even now, decades later, there was a collective instinct to lower voices when the subject arose, as if respect might still matter to someone who could no longer hear it. Some places remember tragedies through monuments. This place remembered through restraint. Emily Carter never became a symbol in the public sense. No viral campaigns. No slogans. Just a quiet reference point, shared among those who understood the cost of inattention. Her story didn't teach people how to grieve. It taught them how to notice. That noticing extended outward. Cases once dismissed as improbable were reconsidered. Witness statements once labeled unreliable were reread with new context. Investigators learned to treat intuition not as evidence, but as a signal, something that deserved follow-up rather than ridicule. The difference was subtle, but it mattered. Because most failures in justice don't come from malice. They come from momentum. Emily Carter's case slowed that momentum, if only slightly. It forced a pause in the machinery, a moment where someone asked, "What if we're wrong?" And in systems built on confidence, that question is radical. Her family eventually stopped answering interview requests. Not out of bitterness, but out of exhaustion. They had said everything there was to say. The truth had surfaced. The consequences had followed. What remained was theirs alone, a private landscape of memory and absence that no investigation could restore. They carried Emily forward in ordinary ways. In names chosen for children. In habits unconsciously inherited. In moments when silence felt heavier than usual. Grief, when stretched across decades, stops looking dramatic. It looks like endurance. And so does responsibility. Somewhere tonight, a dispatcher will hesitate before closing a call. An officer will glance twice at an object that doesn't quite belong. An investigator will resist the urge to simplify a story that feels too clean. They won't think of Emily Carter explicitly. But she will be there. In the pause. In the doubt. In the refusal to move on too quickly. That is the final truth of this case. Not that it was solved. Not that justice arrived late. But that attention, once lost, is nearly impossible to recover, and once regained, must be guarded relentlessly. Because every cold case begins the same way. With a moment someone thought didn't matter. Emily Carter proved that it always does. Every cold case ends on paper. But not in the world. The Emily Carter file now lives where all completed cases eventually go, archived, categorized, retrievable with the right credentials. A solved mystery reduced to data points and timestamps. The system can summon it in seconds. The human cost, however, remains stubbornly analog. It surfaces in pauses, in second thoughts, in the moments where certainty hesitates. That hesitation is the residue of this case. Because what ultimately frightened those closest to it was not the crime itself, but how ordinary everything looked while it was happening. No alarms. No chaos. No cinematic warning signs. Just a young woman disappearing into a gap created by routine, assumption, and time. That is how most truths are lost. Not stolen. not destroyed, just left unattended. Emily Carter's disappearance did not announce itself as history in the making. It arrived disguised as inconvenience, a delayed return, a missed call, a concern that felt premature, almost embarrassing to voice too loudly. By the time certainty arrived, momentum had already carried everyone past the point where questions felt urgent. That pattern became the quiet thesis of the case. In training rooms, instructors stopped emphasizing dramatic breakthroughs and began stressing something far less glamorous: attention span. The ability to stay curious when nothing seems urgent. The discipline to resist narrative shortcuts. The willingness to sit with ambiguity longer than comfort allows. Because ambiguity is where truth hides best. Emily's case exposed how quickly ambiguity gets paved over by efficiency. How systems reward closure over accuracy. How humans, wired to seek resolution, sometimes accept the first version of reality that allows them to move on. That acceptance nearly buried the truth forever. The phrase, "crack cold case," implies force, pressure, persistence. In reality, this one reopened because someone noticed what shouldn't have survived. A fragment of evidence preserved more by accident than intention. A detail spared not by foresight, but by neglect. That irony was not lost on anyone. The truth emerged not because the system worked perfectly, but because it failed inconsistently. And that inconsistency saved a life story from total erasure. Emily Carter never got to see the world that learned from her disappearance. She never saw her name become a caution instead of a question. She never knew that her absence would sharpen other people's awareness, or that her silence would echo louder than most voices ever do. But that is often how impact works. It does not ask permission. It does not require acknowledgement. It exists whether or not the source is remembered. In quiet towns like hers, there are still nights when windows glow and streets lie empty, and everything looks exactly as it did decades ago. The same calm, the same stillness, the same deceptive sense that nothing important could possibly be unfolding. Those are the moments that matter now. Because somewhere, in a house that looks ordinary, a choice is being made to dismiss a feeling, to postpone a call, to assume someone else will notice if it matters. That choice will feel harmless, rational, justified. It always does. Emily Carter's case stands as proof of what follows afterward. Not panic. Not chaos. Just years of waiting for the moment when someone finally asks the right question. Cold cases do not haunt communities because they are violent. They haunt because they are unfinished. And even when finished, they leave behind a trace, a reminder that justice is not a destination, but a practice. One that demands attention when attention is hardest to give. Emily Carter is no longer missing. But the space she vanished into still exists. It lives in assumptions, in routines, in the temptation to look away from the uncomfortable detail. That space is where the next cold case is born. And the only thing standing between it and decades of silence is a single decision, made quietly, in real time, to stop, to look closer, and to believe that the ordinary moment in front of you might matter more than it seems. Because once it's gone, once time seals it away, no amount of hindsight can bring it back. That is the final inheritance of the Emily Carter case. Not fear. Awareness. And the uneasy knowledge that the truth is always closer and more fragile than anyone wants to admit. There is a lie people tell themselves about time. They say it heals. They say it smooths the edges. They say it puts distance between what happened and what still hurts. But time doesn't heal anything. It only reveals what was never treated. The Emily Carter case became proof of that in ways no verdict ever could. Because even after the truth surfaced, after the cold case was stamped solved and filed away, the emotional geography of the town never fully returned to its original shape. Certain corners felt heavier. Certain silences lingered longer than they should have. Time passed. The unease remained. What unsettled people most was not the crime itself, but how long it had taken for anyone to truly see it. How easily normalcy had wrapped itself around something profoundly wrong. How quickly the extraordinary had been mistaken for the improbable. That realization rewired memory. People began revisiting their own pasts, not with nostalgia, but with suspicion. Moments once dismissed as nothing suddenly felt unfinished. A phone call that ended too abruptly. A neighbor who vanished without explanation. A story that never quite added up, but felt impolite to question. Emily's case gave those memories permission to resurface. And with them came discomfort. Because discomfort asks something of you. It demands attention. It demands action. It demands risk. For years, the safest choice had been silence. The safest assumption had been that someone else was paying closer attention. Emily Carter disappeared into that gap, the space between responsibility and convenience. Once people recognized that space, they couldn't unsee it. In police departments far from Ohio, supervisors began asking different questions. Not louder ones. Not more aggressive ones. Just quieter, more dangerous ones. What don't we know yet? What are we assuming? What feels off, even if we can't prove it? Those questions slowed things down. They complicated narratives. They frustrated people who preferred efficiency over uncertainty. But they also prevented some cases from drifting into limbo, not because of heroics, but because of patience. Emily Carter changed the tempo. Her case reminded professionals that speed is not the same as progress. That closing a file is not the same as understanding a life. That justice rushed is often justice deferred. Outside the system, the public absorbed a different lesson. They learned that disappearance does not always announce itself with violence. That danger can look quiet, polite, normal. That waiting too long to speak up is not neutrality, it's participation in delay. People started calling sooner. Sometimes they were wrong. Sometimes nothing came of it. But silence was no longer the default. That shift mattered more than any conviction. Because the greatest threat to truth is not deception. It is indifference. Emily Carter's story cut through that indifference precisely because it unfolded without spectacle. No dramatic chase. No sudden confession. Just years of nothing, followed by the realization that the nothing had been preventable. That realization stayed with people. Late at night, when the noise recedes and reflection creeps in, some still imagine alternate versions of that first week. A different decision. A different tone of urgency. A different willingness to look foolish for caring too much. Those versions are unbearable. Not because they promise a happy ending, but because they suggest one might have been possible. That is the quiet cruelty of hindsight. It offers clarity only when action is no longer available. Emily Carter exists now at the intersection of that cruelty and that clarity. A reminder that every moment of inaction is also a choice, and that choices echo longer than anyone expects. The town never built a memorial. They didn't need one. Her legacy lived in hesitation, in second looks, in questions asked one beat longer than comfort allows. That is where prevention lies. Not in certainty, not in confidence, but in the courage to doubt the easy answer. The Emily Carter case did not end with peace. It ended with vigilance. And vigilance, unlike closure, does not fade with time. It sharpens, waiting for the next ordinary moment that asks to be taken seriously. In the end, what lingers is not the crime. It is the pause before it was recognized as one. That pause became the quiet center of the Emily Carter case, the space where everything could have shifted, where attention might have intervened, where a life still existed in motion instead of memory. Years later, that pause is what people return to, again and again, not because it offers answers, but because it exposes responsibility. Responsibility does not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it whispers. Emily Carter's disappearance whispered for a long time. It asked questions that felt uncomfortable, premature, inconvenient. And for a while, the world answered with patience instead of urgency, reassurance instead of doubt. By the time certainty replaced hope, time had already done what it does best. It had complicated everything. That is the true anatomy of a cold case. Not ice. Not distance. But delay. Delay wrapped in reason. Delay justified by probability. Delay disguised as calm. Once people understood that, the case stopped feeling isolated. It began to feel familiar. Unsettlingly so. Because everyone could recognize the instinct to wait, to see if things resolved on their own, to avoid overreacting to a feeling that had no evidence yet. Emily Carter vanished into that instinct. And when the truth finally surfaced, it didn't roar. It didn't shock the way people expect revelations to shock. It arrived quietly, carried by fragments that survived against odds, assembled by hands willing to slow down and look again. That quiet arrival changed the meaning of resolution. Resolution, people learned, is not relief. It is accountability delayed too long to feel clean. There was no celebration when the case closed. No moment where grief transformed into peace. Just a sober understanding that something precious had been lost twice, once in 1994, and again in the years when attention drifted elsewhere. Those closest to the case stopped searching for emotional conclusions. They understood that some stories do not offer them. Instead, they offer instruction. Pay attention earlier. Question sooner. Act while uncertainty still has time to matter. Emily Carter became instruction. Not in textbooks. Not in slogans. But an instinct. An instinct sharpened by knowing what happens when you ignore the small, uneasy feeling that tells you something is wrong. The feeling that arrives before evidence. Before certainty. Before permission. That feeling is fragile. It needs protection. Because the world is very good at talking people out of it. The final truth of this case is not about a solved mystery or a name added to a record. It is about the cost of waiting for clarity when clarity only arrives after damage is done. Cold cases are born in those waits. They grow in silence. They mature in neglect. They survive on the assumption that tomorrow will make things clearer. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it only makes things permanent. Emily Carter's story ends where it began, in an ordinary place, on an ordinary timeline, disrupted not by spectacle but by hesitation. What makes it endure is not what happened to her, but what almost didn't happen afterward. Attention returned. Curiosity revived. Silence was challenged. Not in time to save her, but in time to matter to others. That is the final weight of this case. Not closure. Awareness that arrives late and refuses to leave. Because somewhere, right now, in a moment that feels unremarkable, the next question is forming. The next doubt. The next choice between waiting and acting. Emily Carter's legacy lives there. In that choice. And whether this time, someone listens before time turns silence into another cold case.